We have criminal justice reform advocate Miss Ameshia Cross. Ameshia, how are you doing?
Pretty good.
Is this entertaining for you so far?
This is probably the funniest radio segment I have been a part of.
That is not good.
It's a serious show, guy.
Yes, we are a professional AM radio show on a Sunday afternoon after church. People are tuning in for important information, and we got Darnell running this thing. I mean,
How do I always get thrown under the bus? That's all I want to know.
because it's your fault.
All right, well, why don't you switch sides? You come over here and hit some buttons.
Look, I will hit a button to turn it all off and go to the bar.
I ain't mad at you, player. I ain't mad at you, player.
All right, so let's hop back in on this discussion on criminal justice reform. Before the break, you mentioned you work for a nonpartisan nonprofit. Tell us about the nonprofit and what you guys' mission is.
Sure. So I work for the Pretrial Justice Institute. We're based in D.C., and we are nonpartisan. And one of our major goals is reducing incarceration. So we do that in multiple forms. One, pushing towards ending money bail across the country because of its impact on poor individuals, the indigent as well as minority individuals. Raising equity. One of the issues that we see across the country is in terms of sentencing, where people commit the exact same crimes. You put a white man in front of a judge, you put a black man in front of the judge, the sentencing is vastly different. In many cases, the white guy gets to walk. That's something that we need to change.
All right, go ahead.
Also ensuring that we are reducing disparities and making sure that there is an understanding that right now, with what we're looking at with mental health issues, with what we're looking at with addiction issues, that we are funneling people into the help that they need in social services instead of locking those individuals up. Half of all of those who are incarcerated at the jail level are being locked up because of issues related to their mental health, not related to crimes themselves, many of which are folks who can no longer afford their medications or do not have doctors. These people don't belong in jail. They need assistance. And lastly, making sure that we are working with state-level partners at various institutions across the country, because the real change is going to happen in the states. What people don't understand is that as great as the First Step Act is, and I'm a proponent, my organization is a proponent, there is this is a very small segment of the population who are actually incarcerated at the federal level in federal prisons. The majority of our incarcerated population is at the jails at the local level and state prisons at the state level. So people who are really pushing for and can change your criminal justice system and the trajectory for your families and for your communities are going to be those who are state level advocacy groups and those who actually pull the lever of the state legislature, your governor, your state rep, your state senators, your mayors at the city level, as well as your county level executives, because county jails are run by the county.
And it's interesting because I'm on the board of directors for the National Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys, NACDL. And one of the things we said at the last executive board meeting down in Miami was that we have to work with our state level partners, and then beyond the state level, your local bar associations, your prosecutor associations, because many of these things can be handled by your city council. They can be handled by your mayor and your county commission, the people you can actually touch, feel, talk to on a daily basis. So the same way you're talking to them about potholes, you can talk to them about criminal justice reform. Friday, I was in court over here in Fulton. People always forget that I still practice law. It's like that what pays the bill still. But I was in court, and they brought a homeless guy in, and they charged him with was aggressive monetary solicitation. Basically, it's the panhandling ordinance. He asked some white people for money, so they arrested him, and they gave him a $1,000 bond. If he had $1,000, do you think he would have been aggressively panhandling?
And that's part of the issue. We lock people up for things like that. We incentivize to a certain extent the bond industry. Because they continue to elevate these bonds for people who they already know aren't going to be able to pay. Yeah. At the end of the day, you're not going to be out on the street asking people for money if you had the $300, if you had the $500, if you had the $1,000 to get out. The majority of people across this country who are being held on bonds, who are being held on bonds and who stay in jail for 6 months or longer, have bonds of $300 or less. $300 or less, meaning they did not have anyone in their family, in their immediate circle, in their network that could come up with $300 for them to get out.
But then on that same note, you'll have the guy who's a doctor or engineer or a lawyer, and they'll walk in, and their lawyer comes in and says, well, they have these ties to community. They're a property owner. Their family lives here. They are a pillar of the community, and they'll get a sign-on bond and can walk out. No money necessary. But the guy who's begging on the street for change needs $1,000 cash.
Absolutely. And that's one of the issues as well, because the bond industry, well, money bond, there are multiple types of bond. I don't have to tell you this, you're an attorney. But when we talk to people, everyday people, nobody knows that there's bond outside of money. That bond as a term gets associated with money. So the idea is the only way you can get out is if somebody pays. There's so many different ways that we can do this. And actually, we lock people up and we add these bonds without really paying attention to the two reasons you're supposed to have bond to begin with. One, to make sure that you appear in court. Just to make sure that you show up. The second, to make sure that you are not a risk to public safety. If the crime you're being locked up for was not something that would have endangered anyone to begin with, that automatically eliminates that one. If you want people to appear in court, the majority of people will appear in court just like you or I would appear in front of our dentist or doctor if you sent them a text message, if you gave them a call. We do not do that for a lot of people across this country. The majority of jurisdictions do not send reminders. Without those reminders, people often forget. I wouldn't make it to my dentist without reminders. We also have to take into consideration transportation issues and transportation costs. If people are able to get the assistance that they need to make sure that they don't have these barriers, we will see things change.
These are a couple of the other issues with that. So the part about bond being in order to ensure you show up at court, there's already a mechanism for that, which is a bench warrant. If you don't show up at court, they lock you up for a bench warrant. That's your incentive to show up. So what's the point of the money part of it when you're already going to go to jail if you don't show up? It's a double penalty.
Exactly.
It makes absolutely no sense. And then secondarily on this, even with the court date system, it disproportionately impacts poor people because one, you have to pay to get downtown to court. Two, you got to pay for parking. Three, you got to probably try to get off work for the day, and it's hard to tell your job like, hey, I need the morning off because I have to go to court for marijuana or disorderly conduct or whatever else. Four, you have to get child care often because if you're a poor person and your kids aren't in daycare already, well, now you have to find someone to watch your kids while you're in court. And if you bring the kid to court with you, you'll get put out if they start crying during court. So it's a completely ridiculously broken system that can be fixed at the city level, not even the county, at the city level it can get fixed.
It can be fixed at the city level. There are so many easements there. Most states already provide some type of child care support. What we have to recognize is that these systems need to start working together. They need to start speaking to each other. They need to start making it easier for these individuals. It's not that they don't want to show up. The majority of folks, when given the opportunity and having all of these other ducks in a row with their child care, with ensuring that they have transportation. I moved to D.C. from Chicago. In Chicago, transportation is pretty easy. You can find it anywhere. But when I'm talking to people who live in rural America or people who live in the South in general, public transit is not always opportune. In some places, it doesn't even exist. So how are you expecting folks who may or may not have a car to be able to make it here? There has to be some type of mechanism there. In addition to the understanding that if a person went in and couldn't afford $300 to get out, the expectation they're going to be able to continually show up to multiple dates, because we also have to recognize that these court dates aren't one and done. You're asking people to take off from work. Many cases who are working low-wage jobs, you can only call off so many times before you don't have a job anymore.
Well, and on that, so now I'm just going to get into just regular old-fashioned lawyer complaining because what lawyers do, we practice law about 30% of the time, and then 70% of the time we complain about practicing law. The status conference and calendar system that most jurisdictions use is the most broken and ridiculous system on earth. You show up every 2 months or whenever they feel like it on unspecified dates with 2 weeks notice to court, and all you're doing is walking in and saying, all right, today's plea and arraignment. How do you plead? Not guilty. Okay, you can leave. So now I took off the entire morning for work, got child care to say 2 words and then leave. And now I have to show back up in 2 months for a status conference where the DA will just say, oh, we haven't indicted it yet, so further noticed. Now I come back 2 months later where they ask the same question. They say, well, we need to pre-try it with the defense attorney. So now we've pre-tried it. Now we set another calendar date 2 months later. Said, well, now we're doing a motions calendar. And so you get on that calendar. Then after that, you get into the final plea and arraignment calendar 2 months later. Now after that, you finally get on a trial calendar. It might be 2 years since the actual criminal offense happen and 12 different court dates within that 2 years. And clearly by now you have spent hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on this case. And when they offer you any plea deal just to have it done, guess what you do? You take the plea deal whether you did it or not just to have it done. And that's what they're banking on.
Absolutely. And we know, and there have been several studies about this, 9 in 10 plea deals are people who plead just to get out, not people who were guilty, people who in many cases would have been exonerated by evidence anyway. But at the end of the, or the lack thereof, at the end of the day, if you've spent a year and a half going through this system, 2 years, 3 years, many people are spending multiple years in being locked up without having been charged with anything. When you're away from your family, you can't take more tomorrows. That's a huge risk. So people will always admit to things that they did not do if that means that I can see my family, if that means that I can build those connections that I've lost with the people that I care about. I think that there has to be an understanding there. And when we're talking about moving legislators, moving sheriff's departments, moving prosecutors, all of these individuals and stakeholders away from the tough on crime narrative, we also have to help them to understand that first and foremost, crime has gone down over the past decade considerably. What we're locking people up for now is not violent crime. It's not. I'm from Chicago. The majority of violent criminals still run free in the streets. Who's getting locked up? People with dime bags of weed. Period. When we're talking about ending these violent crimes, we have to look at that in an entirely different bucket than we do those who are being locked up in considerable number every single day, because these are not violent criminals. Nobody is going to ever argue to let all violent criminals free. I don't think that's not the case on either side of the aisle. What we are arguing, though, is to support and provide a mechanism to make sure that we are helping those who need it the most.
And if nothing else, just putting a system that makes sense. So, you know, we're in 2018 with iPhones in our hand and the internet at our fingertips, and we're still acting like it's 1873 with the way our criminal justice system runs. All right, we're going to talk more about this after the break. Call in 404-892-2703, News and Talk 1380 WAOK.